On my daughter's engagement night, 65 guests packed our ranch in Tennessee, celebrating her upcoming marriage to the charismatic financial advisor she swore had turned her whole life around. Then, under the warm string lights, she slipped over to me, grabbed my arm tight, and whispered, "Dad, call 911 right now." Just those 5 words, with zero explanation. My smile didn't even flicker, but deep inside, the retired federal judge in me knew that something was deeply, terribly wrong. In that moment, I knew it was time to move. I'm so grateful you've chosen to be here today. Please drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. Every single response means the world to me. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Son, astuce. A few fictional elements have been added to smooth out the narrative and build in a solid lesson. Any resemblance to real names or places is pure coincidence. But, the core lesson behind this story is something you'll definitely want to keep in mind. I'm 68 years old, and I spent the better part of my life passing judgment on people. When you sit on a federal bench for 36 years, it refines your instincts. Looking down at a courtroom full of people taking oaths, you learn a slow, painful truth. Deceit almost never makes a grand entrance. It arrives with a firm handshake, a logical explanation, solid eye contact, and a warm smile. It shows up looking exactly like the answer to your deepest hopes. I used to think my decades of experience made me immune to deception. I was wrong. My name is Robert Callahan. I live on Cumberland River Ranch, a 340-acre property in Robertson County, Tennessee, about 40 miles north of Nashville. The land stretches east from the riverbanks, all the way to a thick line of old oaks and hickories, with open pasture in between where the cattle graze. In the early mornings, when the fog stays low over the southern fields and the herd drifts through the dew, the place looks like a painting. Eleanor used to say it was just God showing off. Eleanor was my wife for 31 years. She passed away in the spring of 2022, only 14 months after her diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer, caught late. The oncologist at Vanderbilt sat across from us in his cramped office, a tissue box resting right at the corner of his desk. I remember thinking with a cold, detached clarity, the kind of defense mechanism built by a spent decades absorbing bad news without blinking. That the tissue box was a permanent fixture, placed there every morning just as routinely as a cup of coffee. "How long?" I asked. The doctor looked at me, then at Eleanor, then back to me. "With aggressive treatment, maybe 18 months. Without it, 6 to 9. Eleanor reached out and laid her hand right over mine. Her fingers were warm. "Robert," she said softly, "stop cross-examining the gentleman. He's just doing his job." Even then, even in that room, she could still make me smile. We chose treatment. For the next 14 months, we threw everything modern medicine had at it, backed by Eleanor's sheer stubbornness. She taught her last class at Robertson County High School in October of 2021. Standing in front of the whiteboard in her reading glasses, chalk dust on her sleeves, refusing to step down before the semester ended. Her students had no idea she was sick. She didn't want their sympathy, she just wanted their attention. That was Eleanor. Her final weeks were spent at Vanderbilt Hospital. I drove down every morning before 6:00 a.m. and stayed until the nurses forced me to go home. Our daughter, Diane, flew in from Memphis every weekend, sleeping in the chair beside her mother's bed, holding her hand on the nights I couldn't be there. Diane is a cardiologist. Her whole career is built on saving hearts, but watching her sit helplessly by her mother's bed was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever seen. On the fourth day of Eleanor's final week, she had a period of clarity that lasted nearly an hour, sharper than anything we had seen in days. She locked her brown eyes onto mine, the same eyes that kept me honest for 31 years, and asked me to promise her two things. "The first one is easy," she said. Her voice was weak, but her tone was firm. "Stop working 7 days a week. Stay on the ranch, take care of the cattle, and live like a regular person, Robert. Stop acting like a federal employee." "I promise," I said, my throat feeling like concrete. "Good." She squeezed my hand. "The second one is a little harder to explain. I need you to trust, but verify. Always verify." She paused, her gaze sharpening the way it did when she was about to deliver a thought she'd been carrying for a long time. "Especially with Diane." I frowned. "Eleanor, what do you mean?" "Exactly what I said." Her grip tightened. "You spent 36 years reading people in that courtroom. Don't stop reading them just because they're sitting at your dinner table. Promise me." I assumed she meant Diane's career, or maybe hospital politics, or the kind of professional decisions a father helps a daughter navigate. At the time, that explanation made sense to me as I tried to process her words. "I promise," I said. She closed her eyes. "Good man," she whispered. 3 days later, she was gone. Over the next few months, I kept my first promise. I wrapped up my remaining consulting work, handed off my last case reviews, and moved to Cumberland Ranch full-time. I learned cattle management from our ranch manager, Billy Tasker. Billy was a weathered 60-year-old from Coopertown who had been running the place for 8 years. His patience for a former federal judge who didn't know the difference between a feeder calf and a heifer was practically zero. In less than a week, Billy cleared up all my basic misconceptions. In the beginning, Diane visited often. She helped me go through Eleanor's things, pack up her teaching materials, and organize the files her mother kept in the small office off the kitchen. We worked mostly in silence, moving around the house as if trying not to disturb something fragile and invisible. She was only 32, suddenly left, without the woman who had always been her compass. I watched her carry that weight with a quiet grace that broke my heart. For a long time, I couldn't make sense of Eleanor's second promise. Trust, but verify, especially with Diane. On many long nights, I sat on the porch, watching the herd settle into the southern pasture. As the light faded over the trees, replaying that sentence in my head. I analyzed it from every angle a former judge and JAG officer could think of, but I couldn't find an answer. Then, on a Tuesday evening in February, Diane called me from Memphis. Her voice carried something I hadn't heard in years: hope. February in Robertson County is quiet. The cattle keep to themselves, the timber crews are out of season, and the whole ranch feels suspended in time, waiting for the ground to thaw and the first greens to break through. That Tuesday night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of property tax documents when my phone vibrated against the wood. Diane's name lit up the screen. She rarely called on weekday evenings, unless something urgent came up. My chest tightened, a lingering reflex from the 2 years since Eleanor passed. That half-second of worry before answering. I picked up on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart, is everything okay?" "Yeah." A pause. Then, actually, yeah. Better than okay. "Dad." I set my pen down. Something in her tone made me sit up straight. Her voice was lighter than it had been in a long time. Not the careful, controlled lightness she used when managing stress at the hospital, but something genuine and unguarded. It reminded me of her voice on Christmas morning when she was 9 years old. "Tell me about it," I said. "I met someone," she blurted out, as if she had been holding it in and couldn't keep it down any longer. "Last Saturday at the Heart Foundation Gala. His name is Marcus Delaney. He's 43, a financial advisor out of Charlotte. And Dad, he really listens. He listens like he means it. No waiting for his turn to speak. No sneaking glances at his phone. He was just right there." A mix of emotions stirred inside me. A strong, genuine wave of happiness washed over me first, because after a painful relationship she had never fully opened up about, Diane had poured 3 solid years exclusively into her work. But beneath that joy was a smaller, quieter impulse. The instinct cultivated over 36 years on the bench. Triggered whenever someone describes something that sounds a little too perfect, I pushed that instinct down. "Where did you two end up talking?" I asked casually. "Up by the high windows overlooking the river. We were both standing near the silent auction." He made an offhand comment about bourbon being overpriced at charity events. I told him that was the whole point of a fundraiser, and somehow we spent the next 2 hours talking. She laughed, a real warm laugh that seemed to catch even her off guard. "He asked about my work. Not just out of polite courtesy, Dad. He asked deep, follow-up questions. He wanted to know what a cardiologist actually deals with on a Tuesday afternoon." "That's a good sign," I said. And it was. We swapped numbers. He texted the next morning, another pause, softer this time. I wanted you to know." I smiled. "I'm glad you told me," and I truly was. But as I spoke, Eleanor's voice echoed in the back of my mind. Calm and steady, trust but verify, especially with Diane. I reached for my pen. "Tell me a bit more about him. Where is he from?" "Somewhere on the East Coast. He mentioned growing up near the ocean, but he moved to Charlotte about 16 years ago to build his practice." Somewhere on the East Coast wasn't a specific answer. I noted that internally, but kept it to myself. What firm does he consult for? He works independently. He advises small to mid-sized businesses on acquisitions and restructuring. He says he prefers it that way. More flexibility, better client relationships. An independent consultant. No firm to double-check, no colleagues to call. I kept my tone light. "He's never been married?" A slight hesitation. "No." He said he was waiting for the right person. Her voice trailed off gently, like someone handling a piece of glass. That detail landed heavily in my chest. A 43-year-old man, financially stable, articulate according to Diane, charismatic enough to hold a cardiologist's attention for 2 straight hours at a charity gala, and never married. In 36 years on the federal bench, I learned a pattern. A man in his 90s or 50s who has never made a long-term commitment usually falls into one of 3 categories. He's either a workaholic with no room for anyone else, carrying unhealed wounds, or hiding something that makes long-term closeness far too dangerous. I told myself I was overanalyzing. I told myself that 36 years of hearing people lie under oath had left me with an allergy to trust, and that, applying that standard to my daughter's personal life, was unfair. "Sounds like he made a real impression on you," I said. "He did." She let out a breath, and I could hear the smile in it. "I know it's only been a week. I'm not running ahead of myself. I wanted to share it with someone who gets why this matters to me." My throat tightened, because I did get it. She was 34 years old, And over the past 3 years, she had built a career she was genuinely proud of, keeping her schedule packed tight to leave no space for the quiet that creeps in at 2 in the morning. She just wanted to tell someone who would be happy for her, not someone who would instantly drop 20 questions about the guy's financial background. And I had already asked 3. "I'm happy for you, Diane," I said. "I really am. I know you are." A short pause. "He wants to meet you. He said family matters to him, and he wants to do things the right way." I leaned back in my chair, looking out the kitchen window at the dark pasture under the February night sky, the fence line just visible in the gloom. "Have him come out to the ranch," I said. "We'll do dinner." "Really?" The relief in her voice hit me hard. She had expected me to push back. She expected caution, hesitation, conditions. Maybe she was right to expect that. "Really?" I said. "Any man who can make my daughter laugh like that on a Tuesday in February deserves a fair hearing." She laughed again, that genuine, warm sound. Then we drifted into 20 minutes of light, ordinary talk. Her patient load, the ranch fence Billy Tasker had been promising to fix since last November. Easy, safe topics. After hanging up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. In front of me was my cold coffee and the tax papers wrapped in the stillness of the ranch. Marcus Delaney, 43 years old, independent advisor, somewhere on the East Coast. Never married. I picked up my pen and wrote the name in the corner of a clean notepad. Then I sat there staring at it, while Eleanor's voice echoed back right on cue. "Trust, but verify." I folded the paper and slipped it into my shirt pocket. May arrived the way it always does in Tennessee. Suddenly and generously, and generously. The red buds had faded. The oaks were heavy with deep green leaves, and the air carried a warm mix of fresh-cut grass, river water, and something sweet lingering on the breeze. That Saturday I was up by 5 out a.m., walking the eastern fence line with Billy Tasker to check the herd before the heat settled in. Billy wasn't big on small talk, which was one reason I trusted him. He pointed out 2 spots that needed mending, grumbled that the south pasture near the creek bend was getting overgrazed, and walked back toward the barn without looking behind him. I appreciated that about him. Sometimes, a man doesn't need a conversation. He just needs quiet. By noon, I had set the table on the porch, loaded a beef brisket into the smoker I'd fired up at 7 a.m., and changed into a clean shirt. Diane arrived first, driving in from Memphis late that morning. She walked in holding a container of her mother's signature cornbread, made from memory, and set it on the counter without a word. That's how people do it, carrying deep meaning in quiet actions they'd rather not speak out loud. "He's about 10 minutes out," she said, adjusting her jacket in the hallway mirror. Her hands moved quickly, adjusting her collar twice, when once was plenty. She was nervous. Diane didn't usually get nervous. "He'll do just fine," I said. She caught my eye in the glass. "I'm not worried about him. I'm worried about you." Before I could answer, tires crunched over the gravel driveway. Marcus Delaney stepped out of a dark green Ford F-150. It was 3 or 4 years old, clean, but clearly used. It was the kind of truck driven by someone who wants to appear modest, but pays close attention to details behind the scenes. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples. He moved with an easy, confident posture. The posture of someone accustomed to walking into a room full of strangers and putting everyone at ease in seconds. He carried a bottle of 12-year-old Pappy Van Winkle bourbon, expensive enough to show he'd done his research on Tennessee culture. but tasteful enough not to look like he was trying too hard. He held out his hand and looked me straight in the eye. "Judge Callahan, thank you for having me." When Diane talked about this place, she made it sound like the center of the universe. His handshake was firm, his smile warm and steady. He called me Judge instead of Sir or Robert, which told me he had done a little homework on me too. "Come on in," I said. Before dinner, we walked the grounds, checking the pens, the tree line, and the view of the river from the eastern ridge. Marcus asked thoughtful questions about our mineral lease agreement with Middle Tennessee Energy, inquired about timber harvesting plans, and asked whether our cattle operation was focused on cow-calf production or feeder calves. He asked the right questions in the right order, using precise terms without missing a beat. "You know your way around a ranch?" I asked. "I've advised a few agricultural businesses back in the Carolinas," he replied smoothly. "You pick things up along the way." Diane walked beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm every few steps. She looked at him the way people look at something valuable they're afraid might disappear. It gave me a sharp ache in my chest, a feeling I wasn't eager to unpack. We ate on the back porch as the late afternoon sun cast long, golden shadows across the south pasture. The brisket was spot on. 12 hours in the smoker, cooked the only way Eleanor ever considered acceptable. Marcus praised the food, pointing out specific details that made the compliment feel genuine. "Now this is real flavor," he said, cutting off a piece. "Not like those downtown Nashville joints, charging $40 for artificial smoke." Diane laughed. I offered a smile, watching his hands as he ate. Throughout the meal, he spoke about his consulting work, an independent practice in Charlotte, advising small and mid-sized firms on acquisitions and restructuring. He mentioned 2 deals in the Carolinas, with just enough detail to sound authentic, but not enough to be verified. He brought up clients without naming names. "Confidentiality agreements," he explained. It sounded entirely reasonable. He shared observations about market trends with an effortless competence that invited no further questioning. He was good. Professionally speaking, he was exceptionally good. And that was precisely what made me uncomfortable. In my 36 years as a federal judge, I watched hundreds of witnesses deliver testimonies they had rehearsed like actors prepping for a role. They knew their lines, their marks, and exactly when to show emotion. The ones telling lies almost always appeared more polished than those telling the truth. The truth is rarely rehearsed, but a lie has to be. Marcus Delaney didn't stumble once. He didn't pause to find a word, nor did he contradict himself on even the smallest detail. Every answer locked perfectly into the last, like a chain of evidence put together by someone who thoroughly understood cross-examination. At 7:15, his phone vibrated in his shirt pocket. He glanced down, his face entirely calm. "Excuse me for just a moment." East Coast clients. They always forget the time difference. He stood up and walked to the far end of the porch, turning his back to us. I watched him. I watched him closely. His left hand came up and gripped the porch railing tight. His shoulders hitched inward. A subtle movement I'd seen countless times from the bench, the physical reflex of a person receiving news they really didn't want to hear. His other hand cut through the air once, then twice. Short, sharp motions. Those were the gestures of a man giving directives, not reassuring an anxious client. His voice was too low for me to catch the words, but his body language made the situation clear. Then he turned around and caught me watching him. What happened over the next half second was the only completely unguarded moment I saw from Marcus Delaney all evening. A total reset. Swift, practiced, and almost invisible. The tension vanished from his shoulders. His hand dropped to his side. His expression shifted back into the easy, confident look he'd maintained all afternoon. He walked back to the table and sat down. "My apologies," he said casually. "An acquisition closing next week. Everyone panics right at the finish line." "I know that feeling well," I said. Diane smiled at him. He reached across the table to cover her hand, and she turned hers over, weaving her fingers into his. It was seamless, the unthinking action of two people who had built a comfortable rhythm together. I looked away and lifted down my glass. Later, Marcus drove down the gravel road, his taillights fading into the dark. Diane found me on the porch, where I was finishing the last of my bourbon, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the herd settling in for the night. "So?" she asked. Her voice guarded and steady, trying her best to make it sound like the answer didn't matter all that much. "He's impressive," I said. "I mean that." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since the truck pulled into the driveway. "But?" "You know there's no but," I said. "If you're happy, I'm happy." She gave me a quick, tight hug and went inside. I sat alone in the dark for a long time, thinking about a man who could completely reset his face in half a second and hadn't let his guard down once all evening. Eleanor's voice returned, quiet and certain as ever. "Trust, but verify, Robert." I was still working on figuring out what that second part was going to take. By August, Marcus Delaney was a regular presence at Cumberland Ranch. Like kudzu creeping over a Tennessee hillside, it happened gradually, quietly, until one morning you look up and realize it's covered every spot you weren't watching closely. He came down almost every weekend. He volunteered to help Billy Tasker patch up the southern fences. He learned the stock dogs' names. After dinner, he'd sit out on the porch with me, asking about my years on the bench. He brought a focused, patient attention to those conversations. Either he was genuinely interested, or he had practiced the routine until it was completely seamless. So, when Diane told me his parents wanted to drive down from Knoxville to meet us, I agreed before I had fully thought through the consequences. James and Ruth Delaney arrived on a Saturday afternoon in a well-maintained Buick SUV. They dressed comfortably and sensibly, like people who spent a lifetime working hard without feeling any need to show off to the outside world. James was 67, broad-shouldered, with the unhurried composure typical of a retiree. He habitually surveyed the barn structure and the fence posts the way other men look over a dinner menu, an old occupational habit of a civil engineer. Ruth was 64, with warm eyes and a radiant smile. She was the kind of woman who made you feel, within 30 seconds, that she had been genuinely looking forward to meeting you all day. Judge Callahan. James shook my hand, his grip conveying respect for the title without being intimidated by it. "Marcus has told us so much about this place. I see why now." "We brought some peach preserve," Ruth said, pressing a jar into my hands with both of hers. "Homemade. We have a tree in our backyard that produces far more than the two of us could ever eat." Diane's eyes lit up standing beside me. "Oh, that's wonderful. My mom used to make this all the time." Ruth's expression softened immediately. "Marcus mentioned Eleanor to us." "I'm so sorry, dear. Sounds like she was an incredible woman." Diane's eyes welled up for a split second. That sudden, uncontrollable soft tear still caught her off guard whenever someone brought up her mother out of nowhere. She pressed her lips tight and nodded. She really was. We ate lunch on the back porch. The conversation flowed effortlessly. James talked about his time with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, working on bridge and highway projects across the state for 32 years. Ruth shared stories from her career as a primary school teacher for 26 years, a job that left a lasting impact on hundreds of kids who still remembered her name. Marcus sat next to Diane, relaxed and attentive, occasionally adding a small detail to his parents' stories. It was the easy comfort that only comes from being around people you've known your entire life. And that was precisely what kept me on edge. Not a single story contradicted another. Not a single detail needed correcting. In any real family, there is always some natural friction, well-meaning interruptions, playful disagreements, little exaggerations that shift slightly every time a story gets retold. But here, there was none of that. James and Ruth went through the entire afternoon as if they were following a rehearsed script. "Ruth, tell me about Marcus as a boy," I said in a pleasant tone. "What was he like growing up?" Ruth's smile was warm and direct. "Oh, he was a handful, but the good kind. Always tinkering with something. One whole summer, he tried to build a go-kart in the garage using parts he salvaged from a junkyard." She shook her head affectionately. "Never could get it to run, though." James chuckled softly. "He spent way more time on that go-kart than he did on his homework." Marcus grinned. "In my defense, those assignments weren't half as interesting as an engineering problem." Diane laughed and squeezed his arm. I smiled along with them, but noted a quiet detail. That go-kart story had the rhythmic flow of a tale told 100 times before. The setup, the punchline, the loving nod. Smooth, polished, and refined through endless repetitions. After lunch, while the ladies cleared the table, James walked with me along the eastern pasture. He asked remarkably sharp questions about the mineral leases, timber harvesting cycles, and whether I'd considered expanding our hay production to offset feed costs. His knowledge was specific enough to sound authentic, yet broad enough that it could never truly be put to the test. "You've got a real legacy here," he said, looking over the land. "A lot of families let places like this slide. Holding on to it means something." "Eleanor and I built this together," I replied, "so it's hard to let go." He nodded slowly. "The way Marcus talks about Diane, it's how a man speaks when he's completely set on protecting something precious for the rest of his life," he said. "I just wanted you to know that, father to father." I looked at him. His expression was open, earnest, and full of fatherly warmth. Yet my chest tightened with a feeling I couldn't quite name. Part gratitude, part deep suspicion. It felt like being told the exact words you most wanted to hear, by someone who seemed to know your thoughts just a little too well. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. That evening, James and Ruth drove back to Knoxville, their taillights disappearing down the county road. Diane hugged me on the driveway with all her strength, just like she used to do as a little girl when something wonderful happened. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered against my shoulder. "This means everything to me." I held her and said nothing. Because, what could I say? That her future in-laws felt like performers on a stage. That I couldn't find a single flaw, to the point where it felt unnatural for strangers to know exactly how to put me at ease. Later, past midnight, I walked across the yard to check on a young heifer Billy thought might deliver early. I cut past the eastern wall of the barn. Marcus was standing in the shadows by the equipment door, his back turned, phone pressed tight to his ear. His voice was hushed, rapid, and entirely stripped of the warm, easy tone he had used at the dinner table. "I already told you," he said, the sharpness in his tone cutting right through the dark. Stop questioning the timeline. Everything is moving according to plan. Just handle your end. I froze. He didn't hear me. I stood in the dark, close enough to feel the cold edge in his voice. That wasn't an advisor calming an anxious client. It was the chilling authority of a man accustomed to giving orders that nobody gets to challenge. Then his boot scraped against the gravel as he turned. I moved before he could spot me, stepping back into the fence shadows, waiting until he ended the call and went back inside. I stood in the darkness for a long time. The night air was heavy and warm, the herd quiet in the south pasture. Everything, on the surface, looked as peaceful as ever. I reached into my shirt pocket. The folded paper with Marcus Delaney's name was still there, right where it had stayed since the night Diane first called. I hadn't opened it once. I started to realize that the time had come. On a Sunday morning in March, 3 weeks before the engagement party, my daughter opened a spreadsheet on her fiancé's laptop and watched her entire future shatter in under 60 seconds. She didn't tell me that night, nor the next day, nor the day after. She carried that secret alone for 3 full weeks, turning it over in her hands like a sharp blade, searching for a way to hold it without cutting herself to pieces. She finally told me the morning after the engagement party. Not just once, but twice. Because on the second pass, new details resurfaced a shock had buried the first time around. I'll share it the way she told me, because this isn't just my story. It's hers, too. And the terrifying precision in her voice proved she had replayed every single second 100 times in the dark, desperate for an alternative explanation. Marcus was staying at the ranch that weekend. Sunday morning, he was in the shower. His laptop sat open on the guest room desk, screen glowing. Diane needed to check something quickly, a drug interaction for a patient, before her Monday shift. Without a second thought, with the total vulnerability of someone who has chosen to trust completely, she stepped up to the desk and used his computer as if it were her own. The browser had 4 tabs open. The first 3 were ordinary. The fourth was an Excel file titled CD Trust Liquidity Plan, Del XS. She told me later she almost closed it. Her hand was already hovering over the tab, but something about the file name made her pause. Those first 2 letters, CD, her initials, Diane Callahan. She opened it. Column A listed asset classes: real estate, $28 million. Investment accounts, $31 million. Callahan Family Trust, $8 million. Mineral and timber rights, $4 million. Total at the bottom, $67 million. The numbers were exact. No estimates, no rounding. That level of precision required access to documents, account statements, legal filings, wigs of deliberate research and calculated intent. Column B outlined transfer mechanisms. Trust amendment, co-trustee designation, meaning adding a second person to the trust with equal authority to move funds. Joint account access. Every mechanism listed the specific legal paperwork needed for execution. In Tennessee, a family trust can be amended by the grantor or the current trustee. I set up the Callahan Family Trust 20 years ago and transferred sole trustee power to Diane when she turned 30. That meant Diane, and only Diane, held the authority to alter the trust structure, including adding a co-trustee. A husband added after marriage, for example, would gain identical legal standing to transfer funds. Banks would process those transfers without question, since both trustees on record would be authorized. Column C mapped out the timeline. A 30-day and one phrase written in the spreadsheet describing that window shattered any remaining hope of innocence. Before legal intervention can be initiated. You don't write that sentence if you're planning something legitimate. You write it when you're timing a move that has to be completed before anyone can stop you. At the top of the document, right in the header cell, were those two letters, CD. Diane Callahan. Then she heard the shower shut off. I closed the laptop, she told me, her tone flat and drained of emotion, leaving only the bare facts, because facts were the only thing she had left to hold on to. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly knocked it off the desk. I could hear him moving around in the bathroom. I walked over to the window and stood there, trying to force myself to breathe normally. Marcus walked out, hair still damp, towel around his waist, completely at ease. He looked at her by the window and offered that same smooth, confident smile. "Find what you needed?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "I think I did." She kissed him. She brewed coffee. She sat across from him at the guest room table, discussing the catering for the engagement party, and whether the light string should go up Friday or Saturday. All while her heart pounded in her chest so violently, she could feel it in her fingertips. As she finished telling me all this, on the dew-damp grass of the south pasture, the morning light was just beginning to burn the fog off the river. Her jaw was set tight, the line of her cheekbone sharp. Her hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides, knuckles white. "I kept looking for a reason this wasn't what it looked like," she said, her voice cracking for the first time at the edges. Maybe a client file with the same initials. Maybe some financial layout his lawyers put together. "Dad, I went through every single explanation I could think of. Every single one." She bit her lip, holding back the surge of emotion. "But not one explanation accounts for before legal intervention can be initiated. You don't write that for a legitimate client. You write that when you're setting up a theft." My chest felt entirely hollowed out, cold as ice. $67 million. Every single asset Eleanor and I had spent 40 years building, laid out on a spreadsheet with a 30-day timeline for theft. "Why didn't you call me?" My voice sounded far rougher than I expected. She looked up at me, and the wall in her eyes finally crumbled. It wasn't a flood, just a clean, sudden break. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she pressed the back of her hand hard against her mouth. "Because I was terrified I might be wrong," she muffled behind her hand. "Because if I was wrong, I would be accusing an innocent man and destroying everything. And because..." She paused, forcing herself to regain control. "Because I had to be 100% sure before I said it out loud. Saying it out loud makes it real." I reached out and laid a hand on her shoulder. "It is real," I said quietly, "and we are going to face it together." She nodded, wiping her face with her wrist, her jaw tight once more. Deep in her eyes, something shifted, moving away from pain and turning into something colder, harder, and far more useful. It was the exact look Eleanor used to get whenever she made up her mind and refused to look back. I recognized it instantly. For the first time since last night, the knot in my chest eased just a fraction. Because no matter how carefully Marcus Delaney had constructed his plan, he had made one fatal miscalculation. He had picked the wrong family's daughter. For Cumberland Ranch, April is the finest month of the year. Having watched 41 springs unfold here, I can say that with complete objectivity. Dogwoods bloom white along the fence line. The cattle drift lazily across the south pasture. The evening air fills with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. That signature, Tennessee warmth makes you want to sit on the porch and believe the world is entirely good. On the night of my daughter's engagement party, all of it felt like a meticulously staged set. By 7 p.m., 65 guests had gathered in the back garden of Cumberland Ranch. String lights stretched between the old oaks, casting a golden glow over tables draped in white linen. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of appetizers, while the bar near the stone wall kept a steady flow of Tennessee whiskey and sweet tea. Diane had spent 3 weeks planning the evening, handling every detail down to the floral arrangements. The effort showed. The ranch looked more than ever like a place where good things happen to good people. Marcus stood right in the center of it all, one arm wrapped around Diane's waist, laughing heartily at a joke made by one of her colleagues from Memphis General Hospital. He wore a dark gray suit, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, no tie, relaxed yet commanding. He looked like a man who had already won the prize, and was generous enough not to brag about it. I stood at the edge of the porch, with an untouched glass of whiskey, watching him navigate the room. For 3 weeks, ever since Diane told me about the spreadsheet, I had been watching him through a completely different lens. I wasn't searching for nervous habits, hesitation, or cracks in his performance. I was searching for evidence. There is a difference between the two, and 36 years on the bench had taught me to know the distinction precisely. By 8 p.m., the party was in full swing. Conversations overlapped, laughter bounced through the warm air, and the noise signaled that people had dropped their formality and were truly enjoying themselves. I moved through the crowd at an unhurried pace, stopping to shake hands, accept congratulations, and ask after children, careers, and summer plans. I spent 8 minutes discussing rural healthcare challenges with a cardiologist from Diane's hospital, E-log, and 5 minutes chatting about hay prices with a neighbor from down the county road. Then I spent 10 minutes talking with Marcus. I caught him near the bar while Diane was busy hosting on the other side of the yard. He was sipping his bourbon alone, looking entirely at home. "Judge Callahan," he said, lifting his glass slightly, "you've put together a wonderful evening." "Diane put it together," I replied. "I just provided the venue and tried to stay out of the way." He chuckled, that warm, genuine-sounding laugh I'd heard dozens of times. That's the mark of a wise man, knowing when to lend support and when to get out of the way of capable people. I smiled. "Tell me," I said casually. "Our mineral lease comes up for renewal in October. Middle Tennessee Energy wants a 10-year extension. From an advisory standpoint, what's your take on a deal like that?" Something flickered across his face. "Blink and you miss it fast." It was that micro-expression a person makes when hit with a professional question one level deeper than what they had rehearsed for. His eyes made a tiny adjustment, recalibrating. In less than a second, his relaxed confidence was fully restored. "I'd want to review the current lease terms before giving specific advice," he said smoothly. "But generally, a 10-year commitment on mineral rights favors the lessee, unless there are strong escalation clauses tied to commodity pricing. I'd lean toward pushing for a shorter initial term with renewal options." It was a solid answer that sounded professional, but it was also entirely generic. It was the kind of answer you give when you've read enough material to sound convincing without having actual, hands-on experience. I had seen that exact same routine from expert witnesses for over 30 years. "Good advice," I said pleasantly. "I'll keep that in mind." He excused himself to find Diane, and I watched him walk across the garden with that steady, confident stride. 8:47 p.m. I noted the time because old judicial habits die hard. Diane broke away from a group of her hospital colleagues near the Rose Arch. She moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, stopping twice to hug guests and laughing at something, a neighbor said. Completely natural, completely composed. Carrying that heavy secret for 3 months had given her a performer's discipline I never expected, but couldn't help admiring. She found me by the stone wall, at the absolute edge of the garden. She wrapped both hands around my arm, the way she used to as a little girl, when she had something important to tell me. She leaned in close, her cheek almost touching mine, her lips right at my ear. "Dad." Her voice was barely a whisper, completely stripped of emotion, leaving only pure urgency. "Call 911 right now." Then she stepped back, turned to a passing guest with a flawless, genuine smile, offered a brief hug, and walked back across the garden toward Marcus. She slipped her hand into his. She laughed at something he said. She rested her head against his shoulder for a fraction of a second. It was the picture of a happy woman deeply in love. I stood by the stone wall, untouched whiskey in hand, feeling those words crash into my chest like a falling weight. Not, "Look into this." Not, "Be careful." Not, "I need to talk to you later." Call 911. She had seen something tonight, something extremely specific. Serious enough that her immediate instinct was to bring in law enforcement. Not a talk, not a confrontation. The police. I took a slow breath through my nose, adjusted my jacket, and took a small, deliberate sip from my glass. Because a father, standing at the edge of his daughter's engagement party, needs to look like a father enjoying his daughter's engagement party. Across the garden, Marcus caught my eye. He raised his glass slightly, giving me an easy nod and a smile. Warm, confident, the look of a man who believed he had every detail firmly under control. I raised my glass in return. For the next 40 minutes, I dutifully played the part of the father of the bride-to-be. I shook hands, shared stories, laughed at the right moments, and remembered the names of guests' grandchildren. I was present, gracious, and deliberately unremarkable. But behind every conversation, my mind was working at full speed, running the way it used to during the toughest trials, cold, fast, completely focused. Sorting through what I knew, what I needed to know, and what my next move was the second the last car cleared my driveway. When the guests finally filtered out, Marcus walked Diane over to the guest house, and their voices faded into the dark past the tree line. I walked inside. I locked the front door, went upstairs, and stepped into my study. A photograph of Eleanor still sat at the corner of the desk, taken 6 months before her diagnosis. She was standing in the south pasture, laughing at something off-camera, afternoon sunlight dancing in her hair. I sat down and looked at her face for a long time. "You knew," I said softly. "Before he ever set foot on this property, you saw right through him, didn't you? That's why you asked for that promise." The photo offered no reply, but I could still hear her voice. "Trust, but verify, Robert, especially with Diane." Starting tomorrow morning, I was going to verify everything. The morning after the engagement party, Cumberland Ranch looked like it always did. The same herd moved slowly across the south pasture. The same fog hung low over the river. The same dull gray light broke slowly over the eastern tree line, just as I had watched it do every morning for the past 41 years. The world didn't adjust its routine for the dark plot unfolding right in front of us. I'd been awake since 3:30 a.m. By 4:15, I gave up on sleep entirely. Dressed in the dark and went downstairs to brew coffee. I stood by the kitchen window with my mug, looking across the yard at the guest house. Its windows were pitch black, and I thought about the man sleeping inside, the man who had spent nearly 2 years planning to steal everything. Eleanor and I had spent a lifetime building. At 5 sharp, I picked up my phone and texted Diane, "South Pasture, right now, come alone." 4 minutes later, she replied, "On my way." 7 minutes later, she stepped through the back door. Barefoot, a work jacket pulled over her pajamas, her hair unbrushed. She hadn't leapt either. I could see it in her face. As she walked across the dew-soaked grass, her steps were careful and deliberate, supported purely by adrenaline and willpower. We didn't speak a word until we walked the full length of the southern fence, reaching the far corner where the boundary met the old riverbed. It was far enough from the guest house that Marcus would only see 2 distant figures taking a walk in the morning light. A father and daughter, sharing a quiet moment before the world woke up. Diane stopped and turned to me, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her jaw set, her eyes rimmed red, without a tear left. She had cried earlier. Now she was done. "Tell me everything," I said. "From the beginning, don't leave out a single detail." She took a deep, trembling breath, clearing her throat to steady her voice, and began. She told me about the laptop, the open tab, the file name with her initials, the asset figures totaling $67 million, and the calculated strategy that required access she had never granted. She told me about standing by the guest room window, trying to catch her breath while Marcus dried his hair just 10 feet away in the bathroom. She told me about the last 3 weeks, spent searching for an explanation that wouldn't make her stomach turn. Then, she told me what she had seen at the party the night before. "He left his phone on the cocktail table," she said, her voice flat and controlled. "Screen up. He does that sometimes when he's talking to people. Sets it down so they know he isn't distracted. But last night, while he was talking to Dr. Hensley from the hospital, a notification popped up on the screen right in front of me. I watched her closely. What notification? A photo preview from his camera app. She pressed her lips tight for a moment. The thumbnail was small, but I could make out the details. It was a document. A legal document. From the looks of it, the letterhead looked like the cream-colored paper from your study, the exact stock you use for estate planning. A cold chill ran through my chest. "He took photos of documents in my study? Looks like it." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word, but she forced it back down. "I don't know when. Over the past month. While I was at the hospital and you were out checking the property, he was alone in the house at least twice. I didn't think twice about it. Then, I trusted him, Dad." Those last words came out with a raw, jagged pain, like something tearing inside her. I trusted him completely. I reached out and laid a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. She just stood there, taking in the contact, like someone absorbing support they weren't sure they deserved. "You trusted him because he built himself to be trusted," I said. "That isn't a failure of judgment on your part. That's his trade." She looked up at me, her eyes glistening, but her gaze was sharp as a razor. "What do we do now? Call 911 right here? Confront him?" "No," I said firmly. "We don't confront him. Not yet." "Dad, listen to me." I kept my voice low and steady. "If Marcus is who I think he is, he's done this before. He's a professional. The second he realizes we're on to him, he'll be in his truck and down the driveway, before we can finish a sentence. He'll erase his tracks, change his identity, and move on to the next target. We'll never catch him, and we'll never prove what he was planning. Diane stared at me, the muscle in her jaw pulsing. So, I just keep playing along? Yes, I said. I know how hard that is. But right now, our only advantage is that he thinks we're completely in the dark. If we lose that, we lose everything. She turned toward the south pasture. The cattle moved slowly through the morning mist, the ranch stretching out in the gray light, quiet as always, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "How long do I have to keep this up?" she asked. "Until we build a case strong enough to land him in federal court," I said. "I'm calling our estate attorney this morning. And then I'm hiring an investigator who specializes in this. We're going to find out who Marcus Delaney really is, what he's done in the past, and assemble evidence that holds up in court. Then we make our move." She stood silent for a moment, staring at the fence line. When she turned back, her expression had shifted. The raw pain was still there, but covered by a cold, hardened resolve. "He was going to marry me on a Saturday," she said. "Have me sign papers on a Friday, steal everything we own on a Monday, and smile through the entire thing." "Yes," I said. "That seems to have been the plan." She lifted her chin. "Then let's make sure it's the last plan he ever puts together." Across the yard, the kitchen light in the guest house clicked on. Marcus was awake, starting his day. He walked past the window with a coffee mug, glancing out toward the pasture. He caught sight of us by the fence. He raised his mug and gave a cheerful, easy wave. Diane raised her hand and waved back, her expression warm, relaxed, and revealing nothing. I raised my hand and waved back, too. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat at my kitchen table, eating scrambled eggs and casually discussing whether a December wedding on the patio would need outdoor heaters. He was charming, relaxed, and completely convinced. Everything was moving according to plan. He had no idea that the two people sitting across from him had just decided to dismantle his entire life. Marcus left the ranch at 10:30 a.m. on Monday, tossing his overnight bag into his dark green Ford F-150. On the porch, he held Diane in a long embrace, resting his chin on her head, then shook my hand with that same firm, steady grip I had been observing for 11 months. He said the weekend had been wonderful. He said he was looking forward to the wedding. I watched his taillights until the tree line swallowed them whole, the dust from his tires still settling on the gravel. Before the dust even cleared, I picked up the phone. My first call was to Patricia Odom. Pat had been our family's estate attorney for 18 years, a sharp, formidable woman who liked wearing red suits to depositions, because she said it made opposing counsel underestimate her. No one ever made that mistake. Twice. She answered on the second ring, her voice carrying an efficient rhythm that told me she was already deep into her Monday tasks. "Robert, what's going on?" "I need to understand something about the family trust," I said, hypothetically. A pause. Pat knew me far too well to believe I asked hypothetical questions. "Go ahead." "Diane gets married. Her husband is added as a co-trustee. How fast could assets be transferred?" A longer pause this time. When Pat spoke again, her voice dropped half an octave, the shift from legal counsel to trusted ally. The Callahan Family Trust was set up under Tennessee law. Diane became sole trustee at 30. "Robert, you don't have signature authority anymore, which means you can't unilaterally stop an amendment she initiates." She hesitated. "Are you telling me what I think you're telling me?" "Answer the question first, Pat." With the right paperwork, trust amendments, co-trustee designations, and a marriage certificate establishing legal standing, a co-trustee could authorize wire transfers within 48 to 72 hours of being added to the account. First Tennessee Bank processes trustee transaction. T transaction, same day, if the documentation checks out. They have no legal obligation to delay or investigate transactions executed by two authorized trustees. Her tone turned flat and cold. By the time you could initiate a legal intervention, the funds would be sitting in a jurisdiction far out of reach. $67 million, I said. In 3 days. I heard Pat catch her breath. Robert, tell me everything. I laid out the details about the spreadsheet, the asset columns, the note about moving before legal intervention could be initiated, the document photo notification on Marcus's phone at the party, and the 11 months of a performance so seamless it had fooled everyone in this house. Except Eleanor, who had been gone for 3 years and still managed to see it coming. When I finished, Pat was silent for 4 full seconds. I want to take him down, Shia said. It was the first time in 18 years I'd heard her voice lose its cool composure. Her professional tone returned just as quickly. I have a contact in the Financial Crimes Division at the FBI field office in Nashville. Agent Brenda Kowalski. She's thorough, relentless, and she'll definitely want this case. But Robert, she needs evidence. Real evidence, not just a spreadsheet Diane glimpsed for 60 seconds and a photo thumbnail. I'm hiring an investigator, I said. As soon as I have concrete proof, I'll call you. Move fast, Robert, Pat warned. If this man is running on a timeline, you're already behind. My second call was to Victor Haynes. I had met Victor 15 years ago during a federal tax fraud investigation that spanned 4 states and 17 shell companies. He was with IRS criminal investigation at the time, working as a forensic accountant. He had a rare talent for following money designed specifically to hide paper trails. He had left the IRS 8 years ago to launch his own private investigation firm. His services were discreet, expensive, and worth every cent. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice calm and unhurried, the tone of a man accustomed to urgent requests who knew better than to absorb someone else's panic. Victor, it's Judge Callahan, I said. I need a comprehensive background check. Everything you can pull. Name is Marcus Delaney, 43. Claims to be a financial advisor out of Charlotte. Says he grew up on the East Coast, state unspecified. Independent practice, no parent firm. Never married. Minimal digital footprint beyond a private LinkedIn profile. What's the timeline? Victor asked. My daughter is scheduled to marry him in 10 weeks. 6 days ago, she found a spreadsheet on his laptop detailing a plan to siphon $67 million from our family trust within 30 days of the wedding. Victor didn't reply immediately. I could hear the faint scratch of a pen on paper. Clean on the surface, or genuinely clean? Too clean, I said. His digital footprint looks manufactured rather than lived in. No employment gaps, no old photos, no public records of dispute. 2 references on LinkedIn, but the accounts look unverified. Everything is just a little too seamless. It's a manufactured identity, Victor said, his tone matter-of-fact. How deep do you want me to dig? I need to know who he actually is, what he's done before, and if he's working with anyone else. I need evidence that will hold up in federal court. A complete deep dive takes 10 days. Key leads, identity verification, prior operations, known associates, I can compress to 3 days. Advanced financial tracing will take longer. Give me the key leads in 3 days, I said. Call me the second you find something. Understood. A brief pause. Judge Callahan, if this man is who you think he is, this isn't his first run. A setup with this level of sophistication isn't something a novice puts together. That's exactly what concerns me, I said. I hung up and stood in the quiet kitchen, holding my phone as the Monday morning silence settled over the ranch. My coffee had gone cold. Outside the window, Billy Tasker was moving the herd from the south pasture to the eastern fields, his truck raising a slow cloud of dust along the fence line. Everything looked completely ordinary. Everything looked so perfectly normal. Over the next 3 days, I conducted my own quietly discreet inquiries, the kind a cautious father might make without raising any alarms. I searched every combination of Marcus Delaney, Charlotte, NC across multiple databases. His professional website was clean and understated, a design typical of someone who understood that overdoing a profile only invites scrutiny. His LinkedIn showed a steady career trajectory, and local business publications in Charlotte quoted him twice on acquisition trends, though his comments were generic enough to avoid deeper scrutiny. No complaints, no legal filings, no negative notes from former associates, no obvious gaps, no loose threads leading anywhere suspicious. A real person leaves a messy digital trail. They have old posts they regret, employment gaps that require awkward explanations, or professional disagreements that pop up in unexpected places. Marcus Delaney had none of those. He didn't have a history, he had a profile. Late on the third afternoon, as I sat on the porch with a glass of water and the remaining property tax files, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in 14 months. Dennis Farrow. My grip tightened on the phone. Dennis was a former colleague from my years on the bench, now running an independent legal consultancy in Nashville. We spoke a few times a year, the kind of professional connection built on decades of mutual respect. I picked up before the second ring finished. Dennis. Robert. His voice was guarded, carrying a tension I recognized instantly. I saw the engagement announcement in the Tennessee Bar Association newsletter this morning. The photo of Diane and her fiancé. A pause lingered just long enough to weigh heavy in the air. I know that man. And if I'm right, you need to hear what I have to say tonight. During my decades on the federal bench, I learned that breakthrough moments in a case rarely look dramatic from the outside. They don't arrive with raised voices or sudden confessions. More often, they come as a quiet phone call on a Tuesday evening while you're sitting on the porch, watching the evening light fade over the pasture. It arrives quietly, casually, and then it changes everything. Dennis Farrow's call came in at 6:47 p.m. that Tuesday evening, 3 days after the engagement party. I had known Dennis for 22 years. We served together on the bench for a decade before he stepped down to launch his firm in Nashville. He was methodical, precise, and held a deep dislike for drama. When Dennis Farrow said something was urgent, it was urgent. Tell me what you saw, I said. The Tennessee Bar Association sends out a monthly newsletter, Dennis began. Announcements, retirements, notable events. This month's issue included a photo from the engagement party. Submitted, I assume, by someone in the legal department at Diane's hospital. He paused. The man standing next to Diane. Robert, I know that face. Different haircut, different glasses, but it's unmistakably the same face, the same posture, the same smile. My hand tightened around the phone. Where? Knoxville. 2 years ago. I was consulting on a commercial real estate deal, a partnership agreement for a mixed-use development on the north side of town. The other party brought in an advisor named Daniel Reeves to structure the financing. The man was charming, well-prepared, knew the terminology, and sounded completely legitimate. Dennis's tone sharpened, but something felt off from day one. Exactly like how you described Marcus. Too polished. Never rattled, had a perfect answer for everything, but never volunteered deeper details on his own background. I started pulling on his background files, and the whole thing fell apart. The firm he claimed to represent was a shell company with no operational history, and the university he listed for his finance degree had no record of his enrollment. I stood up from my chair, hardly realizing I'd moved. What happened next? Before I could put together a full file, he vanished. Stopped taking calls, pulled out of the deal. The transaction collapsed, and my client lost $180,000 in earnest money, legal fees, and retainer costs because the agreement had been structured to shield Reeves from personal liability. Dennis let out a long breath. My client was 61 years old. Robert. That was 3 years of savings down the drain. He managed to keep his house, but barely. Are you certain it's the same man? I zoomed in on the newsletter photo and compared it side by side with a security image my client took during their first meeting. Standard procedure for their firm with outside contractors. Dennis's voice was steady and flat. Same jawline, same eyes, same slight lift on the left side of his mouth when he smiles. I'm certain of it. I walked to the edge of the porch and stood there. The warm evening air brushed against my face as the herd shifted in the pasture below, the weight of everything I was hearing settling heavily on my shoulders. Daniel Reeves, I said. Knoxville. 2 years ago. There could be more names, Dennis said. An operation like this. Forging an identity, locking onto a target, vanishing before charges can be brought. That takes practice. Robert, a skill set like that isn't built on a first or second attempt. I already have an investigator running a background check on him, I said. I'll feed him this information tonight. Good. A pause. Robert, how's Diane holding up? I looked out over the pasture, at the fence line where Eleanor used to walk on Sunday mornings, at the darkening woods under the night sky, and across the yard at the quiet guest house. Right at this moment, Diane was sitting inside, carrying the full weight of what she knew. On the phone, with Marcus discussing floral arrangements for the wedding. She's stronger than anyone should ever have to be, I said. She gets that from her mother, Dennis said softly. The moment I hung up, I dialed Victor Haynes. He answered on the first ring. I was just about to call you, Victor said, a rare urgency in his tone. I pulled up something significant. But you go first. I laid out everything Dennis had passed along. Daniel Reeves, Knoxville, 2 years back. The fake employer references, the falsified degree, the collapsed deal, and the $180,000 and 61-year-old man lost and could never recover. Victor was quiet for a moment. I could hear the click of his keyboard. That matches the exact pattern I've been building on my end, he said. I've been sweeping federal databases, state court records, and financial fraud registries for the name Marcus Delaney. In Charlotte, there's no Marcus Delaney matching his background profile. No tax filings. No professional license registrations. No business filings. This identity was manufactured roughly 4 years ago. He used synthetic documentation, blending it with the legitimate records of a real Marcus Delaney. A 67-year-old retired elementary school teacher living in Gastonia, North Carolina, who has Never worked a day in financial consulting. The wooden floor of the porch felt unsteady. Beneath my boots, and he stole a real person's identity. He borrowed just enough information to construct a plausible surface layer, Victor said. A variation on a social security number, the same first and last name, a adjusted date of birth. Enough to pass a superficial screening, but nowhere near enough to survive forensic scrutiny. More keyboard clicks. As for the Daniel Reeves identity in Knoxville, I'm cross-referencing it right now. Same setup technique, different borrowed base profile, identical methodology. How many names are we dealing with? In 6 days, I've verified 3 separate identities tied to the same biometric profile. Marcus Delaney, Daniel Reeves, and a name I flagged from an 18-month-old financial fraud complaint out of Georgia. Ryan Colton, a woman in Savannah, Georgia, filed a report with the Secretary of State's office, accusing a financial advisor named Ryan Colton of defrauding her elderly father through an investment scheme. An inquiry was opened, but closed when Colton's location couldn't be established. Victor paused. Her father lost $240,000. He was 64. I sat down on the porch steps, my legs making the choice for me. 3 names, 3 confirmed operations, 3 families. Victor, I said, my voice rough, how long has this been going on? Based on what I have so far, at least 5 years. Likely longer. The typing stopped. Judge Callahan, there's one more detail from that Georgia complaint I need you to hear before we go any further. Tell me about the woman who filed it. Her name is Caroline Marsh, 26 at the time, a law student, Victor said, his tone careful and precise. Her father was Daniel Marsh. After he lost the money, his business collapsed. He lost his home. 6 months after Ryan Colton vanished, Daniel Marsh ended his life. The words hit me like a physical force. A sharp, cold ache spread outward from my chest. A father, a real father. A man who had worked his whole life to build his business. A man who welcomed the wrong person into his family trust. A man who lost everything and saw no way forward. A man who left his daughter behind to carry the wreckage alone. If Diane hadn't found that spreadsheet, if she hadn't trusted me and walked down to the south pasture that morning to lay out the truth, that father could have been me. Caroline Marsh, I said, my voice sounding like a stranger's. Where is she now? She finished law school, Victor said. She's currently an attorney in Louisville, Kentucky, specializing in fraud cases. A brief pause. And for 3 years, she's been tracking down the man who destroyed her father. Before I tell you what Victor uncovered next, and I should tell you, this changes everything. Drop the word justice in the comments so I know you're still with me. The truth he uncovered about this man's past will break your heart before it fills you with anger. As a quick note, this next part incorporates fictional narrative elements. If that's not your thing, feel free to step away now. No hard feelings. Victor Haynes called back at 11 a.m. on the 6th day. I was standing in the eastern pasture, inspecting the old cedar posts and wire fence running along the old riverbed to the tree line. The same spot Eleanor loved for Sunday morning walks. Rain had fallen for 2 days straight, leaving the ground soft. Ever since the engagement party, I'd made a habit of walking that perimeter daily, the way some people pace when their mind is restless. The herd paid no attention to me, and the fence didn't actually need fixing. I just needed work for my hands while I waited for the pieces to fall into place. My phone vibrated. It was Victor Haynes. Give it to me, I said. His name isn't Marcus Delaney," Victor said. "He's Owen Garrett, born in 1982 in Cookeville, Tennessee. He's 43 years old. I have his birth certificate, his original Social Security record, and his juvenile record out of Putnam County." A pause. "There is no real Marcus Delaney. Never was. Owen Garrett manufactured the profile out of thin air 4 years ago, using synthetic documentation techniques I've seen in federal fraud prosecutions before." My knees went weak. I reached out with my free hand and grabbed the top strand of fence wire to hold myself up. Owen Garrett, born in Cookeville, a local right here in Tennessee. He understood this land in his bones. The culture, the turns of phrase, how to compliment smoked brisket, how to ask about mineral leases, and how to look a former judge in the eye and shake his hand. He wasn't acting out Southern credibility. He was tapping into his own upbringing. "Go on," I said. 5 years ago, Owen ran his first documented operation in Savannah, Georgia, under the name Ryan Colton. You already know about Daniel Marsh. Here is the rest of the picture." Victor's voice softened, taking on the tone reserved for delivering devastating news. Daniel Marsh spent 32 years building a furniture manufacturing company. 180 employees, a solid reputation across 4 states. After his wife passed, he poured everything into his business and his daughter. Owen used Caroline to get close to him, just like he used Diane. Patient, credible, steadily earning trust. Before Daniel realized what was happening, the money was gone. "The business collapsed," I said. Within 4 months, Daniel lost the company, the facilities, his retirement, and eventually his home. He spent 6 months using every resource he had. Attorneys, private investigators, state agencies, trying to trace Ryan Colton. He found nothing. Victor paused. 6 months after Owen vanished, on a Tuesday morning in October, Daniel Marsh drove to Percy Warner Park in Nashville, sat on a bench overlooking the valley, and took a fatal dose of heart medication. A park ranger found him 3 hours later. He left a note for Caroline in his jacket pocket. It had said he was sorry. It said he had failed her. I let go of the wire fence and sat down right in the damp grass between the cedar posts, pressing the phone tight against my ear as the eastern pasture stretched out around me in the morning light. A man I'd never met. A father who loved his daughter, welcomed the wrong person into his life, lost everything, and felt the only exit left was to leave this world entirely, leaving a note in his jacket pocket on a park bench. If Diane hadn't opened that laptop, if she hadn't trusted me and walked out into that cold pasture to say the truth out loud, that father could have been me. "Victor," I rasped. "What else?" 2 years ago, Owen ran the Daniel Reeves operation in Knoxville, the one your colleague Dennis spotted. Before he could finish his plan, Dennis started verifying his references, so Owen cut his losses and ran. He didn't get the money that time, but the structure was identical. Victor paused. And 18 months ago, Owen launched a much larger operation in Chattanooga under the name Nathan Shaw. The target was Linda Hargrove, 38, daughter of William Hargrove, a commercial real estate developer worth around $90 million Swires. What happened? Owen was with Linda for 14 months. He proposed. They set a date. 3 weeks before the wedding, William Hargrove noticed unusual activity on Linda's accounts and brought in his own investigator. The investigator uncovered enough evidence to confront Owen privately. Victor's voice turned grim. William Hargrove paid Owen Garrett $3 $5 million to sign a non-disclosure agreement, break off the engagement with Linda, and disappear forever. He wanted to shield Linda from the public fallout of a fraud trial. A cold, razor-sharp fury surged through me. He paid him $3.5 million, Victor said, wired to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands within 72 hours of signing the NDA. William Hargrove told my informant he regrets it every single day. Called paying Owen off the worst decision of his life. A pause, because it didn't stop him. It funded him, setting him up to move right on to his next target. Diane. Owen Garrett took $3.5 million from a father trying to protect his daughter and used those resources to target mine. Was he doing this alone? I asked. No. Victor's tone shifted as he brought up new information. I traced the legal paperwork from the Chattanooga operation back to a paralegal based out of Calgary, Alberta. Her name is Sandra Pruitt, 47. A former paralegal at an estate planning law firm specializing in trust law and asset management. She left that firm 3 years ago under undisclosed circumstances. No references, no formal departure notice. He hesitated. She's currently registered as an independent legal consultant with no verifiable client base. Her income flows through a shell entity registered in Alberta called Pruitt Advisory Group. Owen Garrett is listed as a silent co-owner under a variation of his real name. She's the one drafting the documents. What about the parents? I asked. James and Ruth Delaney. They came out to the ranch in August. They knew specific details about this family, about Eleanor. They felt genuine. Victor was quiet for a moment. I checked on them. James and Ruth Delaney are a retired couple living in Knoxville. They are real people. Owen reached out to them through a talent agency that provides background actors and role players. He paid them $4,000 each to play his parents for an afternoon. The go-kart story, the peach preserves, the comments about Marcus at the table. All from a script, a pause. They had no idea what they were actually participating in. Owen presented it to them as an elaborate proposal surprise for his girlfriend's family. One of them might be willing to testify. A deep chill settled over me, completely unrelated to the morning air. Trust amendments, wire transfer instructions, co-trustee designations. She was Owen's legal infrastructure for every run. Victor lowered his voice slightly. I managed to retrieve 3 months of email exchanges between them. Robert, you need to hear how they spoke about Diane. I clenched my jaw so hard my back teeth ached. Read them, Victor began. First email 6 months ago. Sandra to Owen, target confirmed. CD, Diane Callahan. Estimated liquid assets. 67M, trust structure verified. Sole trustee since age 30. Ideal setup. Second email, 2 months ago. Owen to Sandra, April engagement party. Wedding set for 10 weeks out. Timeline is clean. Prepare the filings. Third email, last week, 4 days before the engagement party. Sandra to Owen. Trust amendment documents complete. Signature placement verified. Page 4, co-trustee authorization. Page 7, grantor consent. Once both signatures are secured Saturday night, I file Monday morning when First Tennessee opens. Wire completes Tuesday afternoon. Lisbon account verified. I didn't even realize I had stood up, pacing across the damp grass of the eastern pasture. I pressed the phone so hard to my ear I could feel the pulse beating in my jaw. Robert, Victor said, his tone remaining steady. I have enough evidence right here to hand over to the FBI. Financial conspiracy, wire fraud, identity theft, interstate fraud. It's a solid federal case. but Agent Kowalski will want to catch them red-handed. The rehearsal dinner is in 8 weeks. That's your window. 8 weeks. 56 days. I had to sit across the kitchen table from Owen Garrett, watching him smile at my daughter. Send everything to Patricia Odom tonight, I said. And Victor, find out who else knows. He had inside information on our family. He couldn't have gotten that without help close to us. Someone gave him Diane's schedule. Someone told him about the trust. A pause. I'll keep digging. I hung up and stood in the pasture. Morning light hit the grass, and the fence line Eleanor used to walk stretched off toward the woods. Knowing what a man named Owen Garrett had done to a father named Daniel Marsh rested on my chest like a heavy stone, one I'd carry for the rest of my days. Standing in that wet grass, I made myself a quiet vow. This ends with us. At 3 p.m. that afternoon, Patricia Odom called. I was still sitting at the kitchen table. Victor's files spread out in front of me. Printouts of Owen Garrett's synthetic identity, emails between Owen and Sandra Pruitt, and the paper trail connecting 3 ruined families to the man who sat on my porch, drank my bourbon, and asked about my mineral leases. I'd been studying them for 2 hours, the way I used to review case files on the eve of a tough trial. Slowly, methodically, until every detail was burned into memory, until I understood not just what happened, but how every piece connected. My phone vibrated. Patricia. Robert, she said, her voice tight with a restrained urgency that told me she'd been holding back this call as long as she could. Victor sent over the entire file an hour ago. I've reviewed it. The FBI case is rock solid. Conspiracy, wire fraud, interstate identity theft. Moving this across state lines puts it firmly in federal jurisdiction. She hesitated. But before we move forward, someone needs to speak with you. She called my office this morning. Her name is Caroline Marsh. My chest tightened. Daniel Marsh's daughter. She saw the engagement announcement in the Tennessee Bar Association newsletter and recognized Owen's photo immediately. Patricia lowered her voice. She's been searching for him for 3 years. Robert, she has documentation from the Georgia investigation that strengthens our position significantly. She wants to speak to you directly. Give me her number, I said. Caroline Marsh answered on the second ring. Her voice sounded young. She was only 29, but it carried a weight far beyond her years. It was the tone of someone who had carried a heavy burden for a long time and learned to walk tall under it. Mr. Callahan, she said, I've spent 6 hours staring at that photo, trying to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. Then I decided that regardless of my doubts, I had to make this call. You made the right call, I said. Tell me what you know. She shared her father's story. A story, clearly, rehearsed 1,000 times in her head, searching for the least painful way to deliver it. Daniel Marsh had built his furniture company from a single-room workshop in a rented garage in Murfreesboro. He was the kind of father who, no matter how busy he got, made it to her law school celebration, answered every Tuesday night call, and showed up for every moment that mattered. That was what Owen Garrett destroyed. Not just a business, but a father who never missed a thing. He was that kind of dad, Caroline said, her voice cracking slightly before she pulled it back into focus. He was just a good man. He trusted the wrong person simply because he wanted to build something better for me. Owen targeted him through me. I introduced them. I thought Ryan Colton was genuine. I thought. She stopped, steadying her breath. I thought he was a true gentleman. You had no reason to suspect a thing, I said. Owen Garrett is a professional. That's how he operates. I know that now. Her voice turned firm, grief sharpening into resolve. I became a fraud attorney because of what he did. I spent 3 years building a file on him. Partial identity, matches, victim statements, financial records from the Georgia complaint. I found the Knoxville case 18 months ago, but by the time I traced it, he was already gone. A pause. Mr. Callahan, for 3 years, I've been 6 months behind him, until this morning. Then you aren't behind him anymore, I said. I heard her exhale a long, shuddering breath, the weight of 3 years releasing all at once. How is your daughter? Furious, I said. Scared. But she's the one who uncovered the evidence. She's the reason we're having this conversation right now. My father never got that chance, Caroline said softly. I knew she wasn't speaking to me. She was speaking to Daniel. How different things might have been if Daniel had found that spreadsheet first, if he had walked down to the fence line with his daughter and chosen to fight back, instead of sitting alone under the crushing weight of losing everything. No, I said. He didn't. And I am so deeply sorry for that, Caroline. More than words can say. Silence lingered between us for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone was clear and steady. When you bring him down, I want to be there. I want to see it with my own eyes. You will be, I said. I promise you. After hanging up, I sat in my study, looking at Eleanor's picture on the desk, imagining Daniel Marsh driving to Percy Warner Park on an October morning. A father who loved his daughter, lost everything, and saw no reason to keep going. I imagined 26-year-old Caroline coming home from law school to find the note her father had written. Then Patricia called back. While I was talking to Caroline, she had been on the line with Agent Brenda Kowalski at the FBI field office in Nashville. Brenda reviewed the file Victor submitted. Patricia said, "She's ready to move. The plan is to execute at the rehearsal dinner, catch Owen and Sandra red-handed, right on the spot. She's sending 2 agents to the ranch tomorrow morning to brief you." A pause. "Robert, she asked me to tell you this is one of the cleanest conspiracy cases she's seen in 12 years. Owen Garrett is going to federal prison. The only question left is for how long." "Long enough," I said. "Make sure it's long enough." That evening, I drove to Memphis and met Diane in a corner booth at a quiet diner 3 blocks from the hospital. A place well out of sight of anyone who might know us. I laid out everything. Owen Garrett, Sandra Pruitt, the emails, Caroline Marsh, the FBI involvement. I presented the facts the way I used to outline a case for a jury. The facts first, then the sequence, then the implications. Diane listened without interrupting, her coffee growing completely cold in front of her. When I finished, she looked at me across the table, her jaw set, her eyes burning with a bright, fierce intensity. 8 weeks, she said. 8 weeks, I confirmed. She gave a single, firm nod. Then let's make sure every single second of those 8 weeks counts. 8 weeks sounds like a long time until you're actually living through it. The morning after my call with Patricia, Agent Brenda Kowalski arrived at Cumberland Ranch. Driving an unmarked sedan with Tennessee plates, she carried herself with a calm, efficient authority that clearly marked her as a veteran who had been handling major federal cases since before Diane started medical school. At 46, with sharp eyes and dark hair cut short, she possessed that distinct composure reserved for professionals who know the best investigative technique is simply waiting. We sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours while she walked me through the operational plan, treating it with the precise clarity of a surgeon explaining a routine procedure. We let them believe everything is moving ahead as planned, she said, spreading a floor plan of the Opryland Hotel across the table. Sandra Pruitt arrives the day before the rehearsal dinner, checking in under her consulting firm's name. She'll present herself to Owen as legal counsel assisting with post-nuptial estate planning. Her cover for delivering the paperwork. Our surveillance confirms this was her exact approach in at least 2 previous operations. Kowalski pointed to a spot on the floor plan. You'll be wearing a digital recording device right here, in your left breast pocket. 6-hour battery life. Everything picked up will feed directly to our support vehicle, in the parking lot, in real time. She looked me straight in the eye. The moment you hear verbal confirmation of their plan, when the 2 of them discuss the documents and asset transfers. You send me a single text. Now. My team moves in within 60 seconds. What if they separate? I asked. You stay with Owen. He's the primary target. Sandra won't move without him. Kowalski folded the floor plan. Judge Callahan, I need to ask you, directly, can you sit across from this man for another 8 weeks without giving away that you know? I thought back over 36 years on the bench, listening to people who had committed terrible acts deliver testimony, maintaining an even, restrained expression without us showing a hint of emotion. Yes, I said. I can. Good. She gathered her files. Because the moment he senses anything wrong, he runs. And, if he runs, he changes his name and moves on to someone else's daughter. Owen came out to the ranch the following weekend, and every weekend after that for 8 straight weeks. He helped Billy Tasker replace the eastern barn door that had been warped since February. After dinner, he sat on the porch, thus discussing catering menus for the wedding venue and debating whether to add a second bartender for the reception. He asked about the mineral lease renewal with the relaxed tone of a man anticipating a long-term stake in the outcome. Every time he offered a smile across the dinner table, I smiled right back. Maintaining that performance cost Diane far more than she let on, though I watched it take its toll day by day. I noticed how her laughter at his jokes lagged by half a second. I saw her hand tense occasionally whenever he held it. I caught her looking across the room at me during quiet moments, her eyes reassuring me. She was holding her ground, counting down the days. She didn't break down once. Not in front of him. Twice, though, after Owen had gone to sleep, I found her in the kitchen late at night. Once by the sink, with the water running, her forehead pressed against the cabinet door, her shoulders shaking silently. Another time at 2:01 a.m., sitting at the kitchen table staring into space over a cup of untouched tea. Both times, I sat down beside her, neither of us needing to speak the words that were already understood. On the 5th weekend, Owen brought up the trust on his own. We were clearing the dinner table when he mentioned casually, after the wedding, we should probably sit down with a financial planner to make sure your estate structure is set up as efficiently as possible. I set my plate down and looked at him. That's Diane's call, I said evenly. The trust belongs to her. He smiled, completely unbothered. Of course. I just want to make sure her interests are protected moving forward. That's all I've ever wanted. The word protected carried a heavy irony, completely detached from its actual meaning. She's very well protected, I replied pleasantly, and continued clearing the table. A week before the rehearsal dinner, Jessica Harmon came to the ranch. She had been Diane's closest friend since their first year at Vanderbilt and had spent months helping coordinate the wedding details. She found me out by the garden Eleanor, planted along the south wall of the house, pulling me aside with her hands twisted together, guilt evident in her expression. Judge Callahan, she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something. I should have said this months ago, but I didn't. And I am so sorry." She pressed her lips tight. "I've noticed things about Marcus. The way he walks away to take phone calls, the trips that don't quite add up, the questions he asks about the ranch, the trust, and the estate. Those questions didn't feel like someone just getting to know the family." Her eyes welled up. "I asked Diane about it once. She told me I was overthinking things, so I dropped it." A tear spilled over, and she wiped it away, quickly, frustrated with herself. "I should have kept asking. I feel like I failed her." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're speaking up now," I said. "That matters." "What can I do?" she asked. "Tell me what I can do." "Come to the rehearsal dinner," I said. "Sit next to Diane. When this is over, she's going to need the people who stood by her." Jessica nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand, visibly pulling herself together. 7 days. In Selwyn Garrett would arrive at the Opryland Hotel, convinced he was 48 hours away from executing the biggest move of his career. Sandra Pruitt would be waiting in room 412 with the documents she had spent 3 years refining. And I would walk into that hotel with a recording device in my breast pocket. And 36 years of judicial patience that had never failed me when it mattered most. Walking back toward the house through the garden, Eleanor's voice came back to me, calm and certain as ever. "Trust, but verify, Robert." I had verified everything. Now, it was time to act. At 1 p.m., I arrived at the Opryland Hotel 6 hours before the rehearsal dinner was set to begin. Victor Haynes met me in the main lobby near the fountain. Wearing a gray sport coat, he blended right in with any other Nashville businessman attending a conference. As he shook my hand, he pressed a small device into my palm, matte black, the size of a key fob, without making direct eye contact. 6-hour battery, he whispered. "It's already live. Everything within range of your left breast pocket streams straight to Kowalski's unit in the parking lot in real time." He hesitated briefly. "Ready for this?" I slid the device into my jacket pocket, feeling its heavy weight resting right against my chest, directly over my heart. 8 weeks in the making, I said. By 7 p.m., 42 guests had gathered in the hotel's second-floor private dining room. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the grand indoor waterfall in the atrium was on full display. The lush garden paths and soft lighting made everything look far warmer and far more stable than it actually was. The room was filled with the scents of fresh flowers and roasted chicken, along with that distinct sense of expectation that comes when people real believe. They're celebrating something real, and Sandra Pruitt had checked into room 412 earlier that afternoon under the name of her shell consulting firm. Agent Kowalski had sent a single-word text at 4 p.m. Confirmed Owen arrived at 6:45 p.m. Dressed in a dark navy suit, his hair styled without a strand out of place. He walked through the dining room doors with an easy, relaxed posture and went straight to Diane. He took both her hands, kissed her cheek, and looked at her the way a man looks at a prized possession he's worked exceptionally hard to acquire. Diane smiled back, her whole face warm, open, and utterly convincing. 8 weeks of constant pressure had sharpened her resolve into something formidable. Watching from across the room, I felt a fierce, protective instinct swell in my chest. 20 minutes into the evening, I found Owen at the bar. He was chatting with one of Diane's colleagues from the hospital, laughing easily at a joke, looking completely in his element. When he saw me approach, he raised his glass. "Judge Callahan," he said with a warm smile. You clean up remarkably well for a cattle rancher. Big night. I have good reason to, I replied, taking the bourbon handed to me by the bartender. I looked him straight in the eye. How are you holding up? Big weekend ahead. Couldn't be better, he said, taking a slow sip. 2 more days and she's mine forever. The word mine landed with a weight that far exceeded his conscious intention. At 8:30 p.m., Owen stood up to deliver his toast. He raised his glass, scanning the room with that practiced, warm gaze, before letting his eyes settle on Diane at the center table. For a long time, I believed some people were simply destined never to get what they truly deserved, he said. His voice sounded smooth and authentic, even as every single word was built on a lie. Then I met Diane, and I realized that if you're patient enough and careful enough, you actually get the things you've been working so hard for. He raised his glass higher toward Diane, to family, and to new beginnings. Applause filled the room. Glasses clinked. Diane touched her glass to his, a gentle smile on her face. I raised my glass as well, thinking to myself, you have no idea how right you are about getting exactly what you've been working for. At 8:52 p.m., Owen excused himself. He leaned in close to Diane, whispered something about a client phone call, kissed her forehead with practiced tenderness, and walked down the hallway toward the elevators. I watched him walk away. I waited 4 minutes, just long enough to ensure no one would connect my departure with his. Then I quietly stepped out, took the elevator up to the 3rd floor, and walked down the carpeted hallway toward room 412. Before I even reached the door, I heard their voices. Sandra Pruitt's voice was crisp, efficient, and entirely stripped of any warmth. The amendment forms are all right here. Trust modification. Page 4. Co-trustee designation, authorizing your name as her spouse. Page 7. Grant her consent. Signature line for Diane. Once we secure both signatures Saturday night, I submit the paperwork. The 2nd First Tennessee opens Monday morning. Timeline after submission? Owen's voice was calm, dripping with quiet satisfaction. The tone of a man watching every piece of a long puzzle fall perfectly into place. Submitted Monday, bank confirmation by Tuesday morning, Sandra replied. Tuesday afternoon, funds moved to the intermediary account in Delaware. Tuesday night, routed straight to Lisbon. We fly out Tuesday at 2 p.m. A pause. By Wednesday morning, 67 million will be spread across 11 shell accounts in 4 different jurisdictions. Even if the FBI gets involved, international asset recovery takes 3 to 5 years minimum. By the time Robert Callahan figures out what hit him, we're completely untraceable and the money is long gone. What about the old man? Owen asked. Sandra let out a faint, dismissive laugh. Robert Callahan hasn't had signature authority on that trust since Diane turned 30. He has 0 legal standing to stop or reverse a transaction executed by authorized co-trustees with proper documentation. There is literally nothing he can do. I had everything I needed: the strategy, the timeline, the bank routing, the account structures, and explicit verbal admission that they knew exactly what they were doing and who they were doing it to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. One word, **, now. I hit send. Then, I did something Agent Kowalski hadn't written into the operational plan. I knocked on the door. Maybe it was 36 years of needing to witness the final verdict delivered in person. Maybe it was the part of me that was no longer acting as a judge, but simply as a father, the father who had watched his daughter silently shake over a kitchen sink for 8 straight weeks. He needed Owen Garrett to realize, face to face, that the man he had most severely underestimated was standing right outside his door. The door swung open. In a span of 2 seconds, Owen's expression shifted from mild surprise to cold calculation to total, desperate realization. Sandra stood by the desk behind him. Documents spread out across the blotter, her face completely frozen. Diane stepped right up to the doorway beside me, with Jessica close behind her. Owen looked at Diane. Something flickered across his face. Not guilt, but a sharp, panicked recalibration. It was the look of a man who realized the target he thought he was casually maneuvering had been watching him with cold clarity the entire time. "Diane, wait. Let me," he started. "Shut up," she said. Her voice was steady as steel, slicing through the air like a blade. "Don't you ever say my name again." 60 seconds later, Agent Kowalski rushed into the hallway with 2 agents, badges held high, their tone official, authoritative, and final. It was over, or nearly over. Agent Kowalski moved through the room with the practiced efficiency of someone who had executed tactical entries dozens of times. She knew that at this stage, speed and precision mattered far more than drama. "Owen Garrett," she announced, her voice carrying the full weight of federal authority. "Also known as Marcus Delaney, Daniel Reeves, Ryan Colton, and Nathan Shaw. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, identity theft, interstate fraud, and attempted grand larceny." She turned toward Sandra. "Sandra Pruitt, you are under arrest as a primary co-conspirator. Conspiracy to commit forgery and wire fraud. Same charges, same jurisdiction." 2 agents moved in with handcuffs. Sandra didn't say a word. Her face turned the color of dry concrete. Her jaw remained clenched tight as she stared blankly at a spot on the wall. The documents on the desk, the trust amendments, the co-trustee authorizations, the transfer instructions for First Tennessee Bank, were gathered calmly and systematically into evidence bags by a 3rd agent. Owen didn't resist the cuffs. He stood with his hands secured behind his back, staring directly at Diane. The charming mask he had worn for months had been completely stripped away, leaving only a cold, stark reality underneath. Then he turned his gaze to me. "You want to know who I am?" he asked softly. There was no anger in his voice, just a quiet, chilling calm that was far more unsettling. "My real name is Owen Garrett. Born in Cookeville, Tennessee, 43 years old." He met my eyes without flinching. 15 years ago, you sentenced my older brother to 12 years in federal prison." The air in the room seemed to freeze instantly. My mind began searching systematically through decades of judicial records, sifting through the catalog of cases that defined my 35 years on the bench. Federal fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, defendants out of Middle Tennessee. Then it clicked. Thomas Garrett. A 2010 case involving wire fraud and securities conspiracy in the Middle District of Tennessee. Thomas was 30 years old, a financial services representative who had defrauded dozens of elderly clients out of their life savings through a series of fictitious investment funds. The evidence had been overwhelming and meticulously documented. I had denied his appeals twice. He was sentenced to 12 years in a federal facility in Kentucky. "Thomas Garrett," I said. Owen's expression shifted slightly, a mix of surprise and dark validation flickering across his features. "You remember?" "I remember the case," I said. I didn't know he had a younger brother. "Nobody did," Owen replied, keeping his voice controlled, though a long suppressed pressure pulsed beneath it. Thomas was 8 years older than me. After our mother got sick, he raised me. He was the only family I had. His jaw tightened. You turned down his appeals twice. You sat up on that high bench and decided his life wasn't worth a second look. I denied those appeals because the evidence was undeniable. I said, he defrauded 23 retirees. Some of them lost everything they owned. He died in that prison. Owen's voice cracked for the first time. A sharp break in his composure before he forced it back down. 5 years in, a heart attack. He was 35 years old. Medical response in that facility was too slow, and by the time they got to him, it was over. I got a phone call from a guard I'd never met, telling me my brother was gone. He let out a heavy breath. I didn't even have the money to give him a proper burial. I had no family left. I had nothing. Diane stood by the door, arms crossed tight over her chest, her expression unreadable. Jessica rested a supportive hand gently on her arm. Sandra took a step forward from where the agent had positioned her, her voice flat, devoid of emotion, stating cold facts. I assume Victor Haynes figured out the connection, she said, not waiting for an answer. Our father was Patrick Garrett. He walked out on Owen's mother when Owen was 6, and walked out on mine when I was 8. Left 2 families behind without looking back, built himself a nice, legitimate life, and left us both with nothing. Her eyes shifted toward me with a deep, lingering contempt. Owen found me through a DNA registry back in 2016. We recognized each other instantly, not just by blood, but by what had been taken from us. She glanced back at Kowalski. Those wealthy families with their pristine estates and family trusts, they were a constant reminder of everything we were denied. So we decided to take it back from them. Kowalski stepped firmly between them and me. That's enough. She nodded to the agents. Get them out of here. Owen turned toward the door. Then he paused. Not resisting, just stopping for a single breath to look back over his shoulder at me. Ask yourself one thing, he said, his voice dropping so low only I could hear. Judge Callahan, I'm exceptionally good at what I do. But I'm not a miracle worker. There's no way I could sit in Charlotte, North Carolina, and magically acquire your daughter's exact schedule, the details of your trust structure, and your complete family financial records on my own. His gaze was cold, steady, and utterly unwavering. Someone close to this family wanted this to happen. Someone close to this family wanted this to happen. You caught me, he paused. But you haven't caught them. The agents escorted him through the doorway and down the hall, his footsteps fading into the thick carpet of the Opryland Hotel until there was only silence. The room suddenly felt vast and hollow. Diane crossed the space in 3 quick strides and buried her face into my shoulder. For the first time in 8 weeks, she didn't have to force a smile or maintain a composure. A deep, involuntary tremor ran through her as her body finally released 2 months of accumulated tension. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tight. It's over, I whispered into her hair. Is it? She murmured against my jacket. He said someone gave him everything. Someone who knows us. Over Diane's shoulder, I caught Victor Haynes's eye. He was already on his phone, his face taut with intense focus. He met my gaze and gave a single, firm nod. The message was clear. I heard it. I'm already on it. Agent Kowalski stepped back into the room from the hallway, her expression serious and controlled. The look of an officer whose case had just expanded into a broader investigation. We have both of them in custody. Sandra will be processed tonight, she said, looking me straight in the eye. We are taking Garrett's statement regarding an insider source very seriously. I'm opening a secondary inquiry immediately. There's one more detail, I said. Before he was handcuffed at the bar, he dropped a hint. He implied someone with institutional knowledge. Someone who knew about this family long before he ever stepped foot in Memphis. Kowalski gave a slow, deliberate nod. I'll need you to go over every person who had access to your trust documents, your family schedule, and your financial structures over the last 4 years. Everyone. Even the people you trust implicitly. I stood in that hotel room, my daughter still holding on to me, as evidence bags were sealed on the desk. Owen Garrett's parting words hung in the air like smoke from an unextinguished fire. Someone close to this family wanted I needed to find out who. We pulled back into Cumberland Ranch at 9:30 p.m. Diane sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, staring blankly into space. It was the complete exhaustion that sets in when the adrenaline finally drains out and there's nothing left to fill the void. Jessica sat beside her, close enough to offer silent support, knowing no words were necessary. I stood by the kitchen window, looking out over the dark south pasture, thinking about Owen Garrett being processed at the federal holding facility in Nashville. I had thought it was over. I kept thinking about how Eleanor would have known exactly what to say right now. Even after 3 years, the ache of missing her returned with a sharp, familiar clarity. At 10:47 p.m., my phone rang. Agent Kowalski, I answered on the second ring. Mr. Callahan. Her voice came through tight and guarded, the tone that usually means bad news, managed with strict professionalism. Owen Garrett escaped custody en route to the holding facility. He overpowered the transport officer at a traffic light on Briley Parkway, about 4 miles from the hotel. The officer is injured but stable. Owen fled on foot into the wooded area along the interstate. A heavy silence lingered over the line. We've initiated a multi-agency search. FBI, Tennessee Highway Patrol, Metro Nashville Police, and the Robertson County Sheriff's Office. But I need you to secure your home immediately. He knows where you live. He knows the layout of the ranch. And tonight, he has absolutely nothing left to lose. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. I turned away from the window. Diane was already staring at me. She had heard enough from across the room to piece it together. Under the bright kitchen lights, all the color drained from her face. Her hands gripped the cold tea mug so hard, her knuckles turned white. He's coming here, she said. It wasn't a question. We don't know that for sure, I replied. A truthful answer, though offering little comfort. He's coming here, she repeated, her voice eerily steady. It wasn't panic. It was the quiet resolve that takes over when a person has already faced the worst-case scenario and decided to meet it head-on. I locked every exterior door and ground floor window. Jessica stayed in the kitchen with Diane. 18 minutes later, following Kowalski's call, 2 Robertson County Sheriff's deputies arrived. One stationed himself at the front entrance, while the other took up a post near the back patio. I told Diane to go upstairs to her old bedroom, lock the door, and open it for no one except me. Before she went up, she looked at me for a long moment. Be careful, she said softly. Please. I've been cautious for 68 years, I told her. Tonight isn't the night that changes. She went upstairs, and I heard the turn of the deadbolt. I sat in my darkened study, staring out at the shadow-draped ranch. The south pasture was still. The eastern tree line was lost against a heavy, starless night sky. Across the yard, The guest house stood dark and silent. The place where Owen had spent dozens of weekends while quietly calculating how to strip this property of everything it was worth. 10 p.m. passed, then 11:30 p.m. The ranch remained completely silent, save for the hum of the heating unit, the occasional shift of cattle in the distance, and the subtle creaks of a 40-year-old wooden frame. At 11:48 p.m., I heard a sound, not outside, inside, below me, coming from the direction of the eastern barn, the working barn where Billy Tasker kept equipment. In the back corner of that barn, bolted straight into the concrete floor, sat a small fireproof safe containing property deeds, account records, and estate archives. Owen knew that barn well. He had helped Billy replace the sliding door back in May. He knew exactly what was kept inside. Without turning on a light, I moved through the house, took the back staircase, slipped through the dark kitchen, and stepped through the side door into the cool night air. The deputy stationed in the back was at the far end of the patio, his flashlight beam sweeping slowly along the fence line. I crossed the yard quietly, reached the eastern barn in 30 seconds, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The space smelled of motor oil and cured hay, a dark interior untouched by light for hours. I flipped the wall switch. Owen Garrett stood at the far end of the barn, right beside the safe. His back was to me, his hands frantically working the combination dial. His suit jacket was gone. The shoulder of his white shirt was torn and caked with dirt, and a slow bleed ran from a cut above his left ear. His hands were visibly shaking, not from the cold, but from the immense weight of watching a 15-year-old yen unravel in a matter of hours. He spun around the moment the overhead light clicked on. His eyes held a wildness I had never seen in him before. The carefully constructed persona had completely collapsed, replaced by the raw, desperate hostility of a trapped animal. "Stay back," he rasped, his voice ragged. "Deputies are 30 yards away," I said, keeping my tone perfectly flat. "You're not walking out of this barn, Owen. I just need the account files." His voice cracked on the last word, dripping with desperation. "The papers in the safe, the property records. I can still make it out. I can still." "It's over," I said. "It was over the second Diane opened that laptop back in March." Something shifted in his face. The wild desperation collapsed inward, making way for a grief so deep and ancient. It looked as though it had been waiting in his chest for years, just to surface. "You took everything from my family?" he almost growled, his voice trembling. "Thomas was all I had. He raised me. He was 22 when our mother got too sick to work. He had nothing, and he worked himself to the bone to keep a roof over us. He made one mistake, and you buried him." He lifted his chin, his jaw shaking. "He died in that prison because the medical staff took too long to move. He was 35 years old, dying alone in a holding facility in Kentucky. And you didn't even know his name until tonight." An uncomfortable ache settled in my chest. Not sympathy for what Owen had turned into, but a somber acknowledgement of the tragedy that had started it all. It was the bleak reality of a system that, in its routine execution, sometimes forgets the human lives caught in its gears. "I know Thomas Garrett's name," I said quietly. "I remember his case, and I am sorry for what happened to him after he left my courtroom. But I do not regret the sentence I handed down." Owen lunged forward. In a desperate, blind rush, he made a move toward the safe, hands outstretched. I stepped directly into his path, not to match him in physical strength, but to place myself squarely between him and the door. between him and any possible exit. It was the stance of a man who had decided this entire ordeal was going to end right here, right now. Up, up, up. He collided heavily with my shoulder, sending us both stumbling. I reached out, grabbed the sturdy edge of an equipment rack, and went down with him onto the concrete floor. I used my weight to pin his arms down, holding him in place for as long as I could. There was no elegance to it. It was simply the stubborn resolve of a 68-year-old father who had spent 8 weeks waiting for this exact conclusion. I opened my mouth and shouted with everything I had. "In here! Eastern barn!" Heavy boots pounded across the gravel outside. The barn door swung wide, and 2 deputies rushed across the floor. Before either of us could stand, they had Owen pinned by the arms. For the second time in 3 hours, steel cuffs clicked around his wrists. His face was pressed flat against the concrete. The fight finally drained out of him completely. As they hauled him toward the entrance, Owen turned his head toward me. His cheek was scraped and bleeding from the impact with the floor, but his eyes burned with an intense focus. "Harrison Webb," he said, his voice low and bitter. "Former Chief Judge, Middle District of Tennessee. He paid me $180,000. Callahan. He gave me everything. Diane's schedule, the trust layout, your financial records. He wanted you to feel what I felt." He took a long, shuddering breath. "You got me. But Webb, he's the one who handed you to us." The deputies pulled him through the doorway and out into the night. I stood alone in the eastern barn, wiping a smudge of dirt and blood off my sleeve, resting my hands against the wall to catch my breath. Harrison Webb. The name landed in my chest like the final, heavy piece of a structure I had been unknowingly assembling for years. Harrison Webb. I knew that name all too well. I walked back into the house, sat down at my study desk, my hands still slightly unsteady, the mark on my sleeve drying. Eleanor's photograph looked back at me from the corner of the desk, just as it always did, steady, patient, unwavering. Harrison Webb. I typed the name into my laptop, waited 4 seconds, and watched the results fill the screen. Former Chief Judge, United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee. Appointed 1998. Served 14 years. Forced to resign in 2017 following an internal judicial misconduct investigation regarding undisclosed financial relationships with trial attorneys. Specifically, allegations that over a 6-year period, he had accepted paid consulting arrangements through a shell LLC from 2 law firms that had favorable rulings pending in his court. That investigation had been triggered by a confidential complaint filed directly with the Judicial Council of the 6th Circuit. The complainant's identity had never been made public, but I knew who filed it. I had filed that complaint in January of 2017. While serving on the Judicial Review Panel, I had gone over case records that crossed my desk, and the pattern was far too distinct to ignore. The same attorneys, the same favorable outcomes. The financial structures were designed to pass a casual glance, but they couldn't survive scrutiny from a former JAG officer who had spent 36 years looking for what people were trying to hide. I reported him because it was the right thing to do. I knew it would dismantle his career, his position, his reputation, the legacy of 14 years on the federal bench. But I did it anyway. I took no pleasure in it, but I didn't hesitate either. Harrison Webb lost everything because I spoke the truth about what he had done. And he had spent 8 long years quietly plotting how to make me pay for it. At midnight, I dialed Victor Haynes. He answered on the very first ring, telling me he had been waiting by the phone. "Webb," I said simply. I've been running his financial trails for the last 2 hours, Victor replied, his voice carrying the intense focus of a man deep in a complex paper trail. Webb Advisory Group LLC, registered in Delaware back in 2019. The sole listed officer is his wife, Margaret Webb. 3 separate wire transfers, $60,000 each, spaced 18 months apart, went from Margaret Webb's personal account to a shell entity called Garrett Consulting Services. Total, $180,000. The date on the first transfer was exactly 4 months after Owen Garrett manufactured the Marcus Delaney identity. Victor paused briefly. Those payments match up perfectly with the 3 phases of Owen's approach toward your family: the initial surveillance, the relationship building, and the final execution plan. My jaw tightened. He financed the entire operation. He financed every step of it, Victor confirmed. And he provided intelligence that Owen could never have gathered on his own from Charlotte. Diane's hospital shifts, the trust breakdown, account structures, even the engagement party dates, set 6 months in advance. When you established the Callahan Family Trust, Webb was still on the bench, moving in the exact same legal circles as your estate attorney. Patricia Odom confirmed it afternoon. 18 years ago, Webb and the senior partner at her former firm attended the same judicial conferences in Memphis 3 years in a row. Trust layouts, beneficiary details, asset summaries. That's the kind of information shared in casual, professional conversations between colleagues who assume they're in safe company. He hadn't broken into a safe or stolen files. He hadn't needed to. He had simply spent years listening to trusted colleagues drop unguarded details, making quiet notes of everything he heard. The rest, he had Owen pieced together through groundwork. It was never just about the money, I said. No, Victor said. He wanted to watch you lose your daughter, just like he lost his career. He wanted you to feel the guilt. He wanted you to know that you couldn't protect the person you cared about most. A heavy pause followed. Money was Owen's motivation. Destruction was Webb's. I sat in my dark study, completely silent for a long time. When Victor finished speaking, Eleanor's photograph was the only source of light in the room, and the pasture outside was dead quiet. 8 years. Harrison Webb had spent 8 full years plotting a revenge so detailed, so patient. In the end, it was stopped only by a single spreadsheet on an accidentally open laptop. I thought about Daniel Marsh, sitting on that bench in Percy Warner Park, with a final note tucked into his jacket pocket. I thought about Caroline Marsh, coming home from law school to find her father gone forever. I thought about Linda Hargrove and her father paying $3.5 million just to make Owen disappear, completely unaware that the payout was simply funding his move toward his next target. All of it, every single ruined family, every stolen year, partially funded and directed by a man who had sat on a federal bench for 14 years. When the system held him accountable, his response was to build his own personal courtroom for vengeance. The next morning at 6 a.m., Agent Kowalski called. FBI agents executed a search warrant at Harrison Webb's residence in Brentwood at 5:45 this morning, she said. Webb was taken into custody without incident. His wife, Margaret, is currently being questioned separately. We have 3 years of financial records, wire transfer receipts, and communication logs between Webb and Owen Garrett. Her voice came through steady and precise. He wrote out a confession before we arrived last night, Judge Callahan. 4 handwritten pages, left right on his kitchen table. What did it say? I asked. Kowalski read the relevant excerpt, noting that Webb's handwriting was remarkably neat and deliberate. The handwriting of a man who spent 14 years signing judicial orders. The confession read, I hired Owen Garrett so Robert Callahan would understand what it feels like to lose the thing he values most, just as I lost everything I had built. He reported my actions and destroyed my career. I wanted him to feel that weight. I wanted him to know that what we build can be taken away at any moment by a single decision from those who claim the moral high ground. I processed that for a moment. What are the charges? I asked. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial authority under federal statutes applying to former officers of the court. Kowalski said, pausing briefly. His counsel will certainly cite his age in mitigation. He's 71. But the paper trail is airtight, and the confession was signed voluntarily. He's going to federal prison, Robert. After hanging up, I drove to Memphis to meet Caroline Marsh at a small cafe near the courthouse where she worked. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall, holding her coffee mug with both hands. The seating choice of someone who had learned to always keep the exits in sight. When she saw me, she stood up. We shook hands and sat down. I laid out everything about Webb. The payments, the confession, Owen's arrest, Sandra's processing, and the charges moving through the federal system over the coming months. She listened quietly, without interrupting. When I finished, she stared down into her coffee for a long time. A single tear fell onto the back of her hand, and she looked at it as if it had caught her completely off guard. My father would have been 67 this year, she said softly. He should have a garden by now. He always wanted a garden. She pressed her lips tight. He'll never get that. All because Owen Garrett wanted money, and Harrison Webb wanted revenge. And neither of them gave a second thought to what it would cost a furniture maker from Murfreesboro, who just wanted to build a good life for his daughter. I know, I said, and I am sorry beyond what words can ever convey. She looked up at me, her eyes rimmed red, but her voice was clear. Will you be there for the sentencing? Every single one, I said. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then she said something I didn't expect. Thank you for not paying him off, she said quietly. William Hargrove paid to make Owen go away, and that money sent him straight to my father. You didn't do that. You built a case. You did it the right way. That matters. It really matters. Early that afternoon, I drove back to Cumberland Ranch. The Tennessee hills along the highway were lush and green, the sky vast, open, and indifferent as ever. Harrison Webb had spent 8 years planning to show me the failure of a father who couldn't protect his daughter. But he hadn't accounted for Eleanor's foresight, Diane's courage, or the sheer stubbornness of a 68-year-old former judge who had spent his entire career refusing to look away from the truth. August is the richest month on Cumberland Ranch. The cattle grow heavy on the thick summer grass, and the tree line on the eastern ridge looks deep and dark. Every evening, the heavy heat breaks with a cool breeze, and the sky over the river takes on colors. Eleanor used to try to describe before giving up, saying some things were simply better witnessed than explained. 8 months have passed since the arrests. The sentencings came in waves through the summer, each one closing a door that had been left open far too long. Owen Garrett was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and assaulting a law enforcement officer. The charges were clear, the evidence undeniable. The recording from my breast pocket brought every word spoken in room 412, 12 straight to the court. A full confession from a man who thought he was home free. He stood motionless as the sentence was read, his eyes meeting mine once across the courtroom before looking away. I didn't look away. Sandra Pruitt received 8 years for conspiracy to commit forgery and wire fraud. She said nothing during her sentencing. Her attorney argued a lack of agency, claiming Owen was the mastermind, and she was merely a tool. But the judge firmly rejected that argument. She drafted the documents. She sent the emails. She knew exactly what she was building, and who she was building it for. Harrison Webb was sentenced to 7 years for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial authority. He was 71, and his defense team pleaded for leniency based on age and past service. But the prosecutor read Webb's own confession aloud to the court. I wanted him to feel what it felt like to lose everything. The courtroom went dead silent. The judge handed down the 7-year sentence, recommending no consideration for early release for the first 4 years. Caroline Marsh attended Owen's sentencing, sitting 3 rows behind me, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Her face carried the quiet composure of someone who had waited a long time and decided to absorb every second of the moment. When the sentence was delivered, I heard her let out a long, shuddering breath as the weight of 3 years finally lifted. Afterward, she found me in the courthouse hallway. My father would be relieved, she said, her voice steady and clear. Not necessarily happy. I don't think he was the kind of man to seek joy in punishment, but relieved that it's on the record. The crime was named, and the account was settled. She took my hand in both of hers. Thank you, Robert. A portion of the assets seized from Webb's and Garrett's accounts was awarded as restitution to the estate of Daniel Marsh and the other verified victims. It couldn't restore what was taken. But it was an official acknowledgement by the court that what was destroyed had value, and the people who were harmed mattered. Diane's healing unfolded over the summer like the Cumberland River after a heavy rain. Sometimes rushing, sometimes slow, occasionally pulling back, but always finding its way forward. She took 6 weeks of leave after the arrests, walking the ranch grounds every morning, seeing a trusted counselor in Nashville twice a week, and calling me every night. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes she just needed to hear a familiar voice for 10 minutes before sleeping. By June, she returned to work part-time at Memphis General. By July, she was back full-time. Then, on a Tuesday evening in August, just an ordinary Tuesday, she called me. Her voice carried a lightness I recognized instantly, because I had been hoping to hear it for months. It was the same lightness from the night she first called me about Marcus Delaney. Except this time, it was real. No performance, no guard up. Completely her own. I'd like to bring someone out to the ranch, she said, for Sunday dinner. His name is Michael Barlow. He's 37, and he works in watershed restoration here in Tennessee. And Dad, he barely talks about himself. He mostly asks questions and actually listens to the answers. I smiled. Bring him out on Sunday, I said. The next morning, out of old habit, I called Victor Haynes. He called back that afternoon. Clean record, steady employment, authentic references. A man who was exactly who he claimed to be, with a lived-in history rather than a manufactured one. On Sunday afternoon, Michael Barlow arrived in a practical pickup truck carrying a jar of local honey from a farm near his office in Cookeville. He shook my hand, addressing me as Judge Callahan without prompting, showing that Diane had mentioned it and he had paid attention. He asked thoughtful questions about the mineral lease renewal, listening closely, without redirecting the conversation to himself. When Diane made a joke, he laughed heartily without trying to outdo her. After dinner, Diane caught me watching them from the porch. She walked across the yard, came up the steps, and slipped her arm through mine, just like she used to when she was small enough to reach only my elbow. "I know you ran a background check," she said softly. "Old habits," I replied. She laughed, a warm, genuine laugh that seemed to surprise even her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for believing me when I came to you, and for not making me face it alone." I laid my hand over hers. "Your mother knew this day would come," I said. "She made me promise I'd be ready." Diane looked out over the pasture, watching the herd graze in the south field, the tree line turning copper in the late afternoon sun, and the eastern fence line, where Eleanor used to take her Sunday walks. "Do you think she knew how bad it would get?" Diane asked. "No," I said. "But she knew you needed someone in your corner, and she knew I needed a reason to stay sharp." I paused. She was right on both counts. Late that afternoon at sunset, I walked the eastern fence line alone, just as I've done every evening since returning to the ranch full-time. The fading light washed the hills in gold. The herd moved steadily across the grass, and the woods stood quiet along the ridge. I stopped at the old cedar post near the corner, the one Eleanor used to touch every time she turned back toward the house. I closed my eyes, listened to the ranch settle into the evening, and heard her voice one last time, clear, certain, and full of peace. "You kept your promise, Robert, both of them. Now, rest." I opened my eyes. The light was fading above the trees, painting the sky in colors. Eleanor never could quite find the words for. I stood there until dark, and then I walked back home. I'm 68 years old, and I learned more from this chapter of my life than in 36 years on the federal bench. Instinct exists for a reason. When something feels off, that quiet voice telling you to take a closer look is a gift. Don't quiet it down. If this ordeal taught me anything, it's that love isn't weak. But love without discernment leaves the door unlocked. You can welcome people into your life while keeping your eyes open. You can trust deeply while still verifying carefully. Those two things aren't opposites. They work together. Don't make the mistake of waiting until it's too late, telling yourself you're just being paranoid, or believing someone you love deserves happiness more than they deserve protection. They deserve both, every single time. This story was never really about revenge. It was about a father keeping two promises to the woman he loved. It was about a daughter finding the courage to speak up when it mattered most. And it was about a simple truth. Justice, no matter how long it takes, is always worth building carefully. To every parent reading this, your instincts matter. Your presence matters. Refusing to let anyone destroy what you've promised to protect. That is what standing up really means. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment below and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And please, subscribe to the channel, because the next story is already waiting for you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for staying with me until the very end.